Good evening. I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, October 2nd, and the Portland Board of Education is meeting at City Hall in Council Chambers. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
Ms. Seeliger? Ms. Vendel? Ms. Davis? Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Ms. Morioni?
Here.
Senor Rodriguez?
Presente.
Mr. Balfons?
Here.
Ms. Clater?
Here.
Ms. Farah? Ms. Yuri? And
Here.
Ms. Power-Rakowski? And Chair Tararo.
Here. And Ms. Davis is still recovering from injuries. She was able to join us for part of this evening in an earlier meeting, but will not be with us for the rest of the night. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For the report of the chair this evening, I just wanted to report on an event from last week, which was the grand opening celebration of the Amanda C. Rowe Elementary School. Many of us that are here tonight were there. Mr. Balfons, Mr. Rodriguez, Ms. Morioni, Ms. Thompson, Mr. Atkinson, Ms. Vendel, and Superintendent Botana and Assistant Superintendent Crocker all attended. There were addresses by Portland City Councilor Nick Mavadonis, Lindsay Rowe, who's the daughter of Amanda Rowe, Lori Davis, our school board member and a member of the building committee, and Superintendent Botana. And it was just a beautiful evening. It went really well, and the school itself looks amazing. If you haven't been there yet, I would encourage everyone to go see it. It was a culmination of years and years of work. Ms. Morioni, Ms. Thompson, and Ms. Davis all served on the building committee that oversaw the 21-step process from beginning to end once state funding was received to oversee this project. So thank you for your hard work and time. It was a long process. Ms. Thompson or Ms. Morioni, did you want to add anything about the ceremony? No, I know that for some members of the board who knew Ms. Rowe personally, it was a very personal moment as well. So it was just a great event all around. So thank you to everyone who attended and to everybody that's been working on that for so many years. I also wanted to remind folks that if you are interested in going to the NSBA conference, to let myself or Superintendent Botana know ASAP. That's going to be on the agenda next week. So we'll need to know who's interested in that in order to approve the funds to go. And then just a reminder that we do have a meeting next week. It's a special meeting, but we will be back to meet on October 9th. And that concludes the report of the chair. Moving into report of the students, we have Casco Bay High School, Ms. Yuri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Hello, this is my first student report of the year. To remind everybody, my name is Tiana Yuri, and I am the representative for Casco Bay High School. So good evening. I'm so happy to be delivering this report. And first off, I'd like to highlight some student action at Casco Bay and let the board know about the current issues that students have been working on. So one of our student clubs, the Student Union, has been dedicated for the past year in identifying and responding to student issues at our high school. Last spring, they issued a poll to our students to get feedback on these issues. They found that students consider the school's primary issue racial divides. Many students have been bothered by self-segregation, specifically at lunch. The Student Union has been working to address this issue by hosting a privilege walk activity to identify root causes of segregation. We are all very proud that this group has taken on this challenging topic and has made progress promoting inclusivity and diversity at our school. And from now on, I am going to try to shift the focus of my student reports to feature student action and issues. Youth voice and participation is at the center of everything we do at Casco Bay, and I am excited to share what we've been up to in the coming weeks. So along with the beginning of our annual expeditions, Casco Bay was on quest. Every year, we send our freshman and senior classes to Cow Island in the Casco Bay for an expeditionary learning experience like no other. There, students bond with their crew through sea kayaking, camping, and hiking over 4 days. Quest grows each student through challenge, building resilience, as well as lots of fun. We are so grateful to have this opportunity, even if the rainy weather was a little bit uncomfortable at times. Next, seniors are also applying for college. So to make sure everybody gets up the mountain, last week we dove into senior college boot camp. We will learn about the financial aid and college opportunities during this day-long intensive. The FAFSA came out October 1st, and we are dedicated to ensure all students can afford and get into college. Next, juniors are beginning their public policy expedition to research specific public policy and make proposals to experts in our community. This is my personal favorite expedition, and I may see some of you at the culmination. So sophomores just kicked off Africa Rising, which researches a need and aid organization for an African country, as well as examines the strengths of these nations. Eventually, students will give a grant presentation to an authentic audience and compete to contribute Casco Bay's fundraise donation to their organization. Finally, freshmen are preparing for their rite of passage. So this is when new freshmen come up in front of the whole school in an assembly and present their talents and their strengths and identify who they are as a class. It is always a very special time. We have had step routines, dances, songs. So that's going to be very exciting, as well as receiving freshman to senior interviews, which will also be lots of fun. Now, Casco Bay is excited to launch our Small Green Acts initiative to make Casco happier and greener. Our Student Future Task Force recently issued a school-wide survey to identify small green acts that we currently do and ones that we can be doing more in the future. We will employ better recycling and energy conservation practices as we move our school into the second decade. Currently, we are also recruiting students to take the Seal of Biliteracy exam. Students are appreciative and enthusiastic that the district celebrates diversity and bilingualism in our community, and we expect to have high turnout for the exam this year, after our pilot year last year. And finally, I am so happy and proud to announce that December 5th, projected, our renovations will be done at Casco Bay. And for all of you who have been following this, we have a great space now, which is much expanded and so wonderful. But the drawback of it being so wonderful and huge is that due to fire code, we now need a new entrance in the front of our building, which will be done December 5th, and we will all be able to not even invade paths and just go right up to Casco Bay. So we are all at Casco Bay, so just incredibly excited about this. So I hope you guys are excited too, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Yuri. And we were out there last week for our last meeting, so we got to see how the great space is coming along. It looks wonderful, it looks fabulous. We can't wait to see how it progresses, and that's another project we've been along with since the beginning, so thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know, Grace, maybe you can help us. Is there an appropriate place on our website to post the student reps reports on the high schools? I think it's obviously there's a lot of great things going on in the high schools, and having it on our website and maybe available for us to share on social media would be a great way to advocate for the great work that they're doing. We can make that. Thank you.
Great. Report of the superintendent.
Good evening. As always, we have a lot of wonderful things that are happening in the Portland Public Schools, and I would like to begin today by congratulating 2 of our 3 national merit semifinalists, including Portland High School students, our student board member Isabel Clater and her classmate Lauren Paradise. We will also honor Casco Bay High School junior Eleanor Tierney Fife at a later meeting. Isabel and Lauren are among a select group of 15,000 students across the country selected from among more than 1.6 million juniors from across the country for this honor based on their performance on the PSAT. Lauren and Isabel are among the top 75 performers in the state of Maine. The next step in this process is for them to submit detailed scholarship applications and continue to knock it out of the park when you take the SAT this spring. I'm confident that we will see you back here as finalists. And I know that I speak for the entire board, for your principal, and for your teachers and fellow students when I tell you that we are extremely proud of you. Congratulations. So I also want to take a minute to recognize your parents. Academic performance is a partnership between students, the school, and the home. And so today's recognition is also a recognition of the hard work that your parents have put in and will continue to put in to support your academic growth over your entire career as students. We recognize that parents are the first teachers, and clearly they've done an amazing job supporting and teaching you. So congratulations also to the parents of Lauren and Isabel. Last week, we hosted a session for parents on the college admissions process for students graduating from a proficiency-based school. The session was well attended, and the overwhelming majority of respondents to our evaluation survey found it helpful. Later in the week, scores of students from Deering High School walked out of school in protest over the implementation of a new grading system associated with proficiency-based grading. I want to underscore that these changes in grading are not the core of the proficiency system. They're simply the way that performance is recorded. We recognize that our efforts to communicate about this work have not been enough to allay the concerns of our students. On behalf of Principal Greg Palmer and the rest of our administrative team, I want to be clear that we will work with our students to make sure that we understand and address their concerns while staying true to the commitment to our learning beliefs and the accompanying instructional practices that go with that. As always, I'm proud of our students. As a district, we always talk about how we encourage our students to express their opinions and advocate for those things that matter to them. Over the past couple of years, they have stood up for each other, for immigrants, and against gun violence. This time, Deering students are standing up for their academic concerns, and they are doing so with inimitable conviction and passion. I look forward to working with them to hear and address their concerns. At the same time, this past week reminds us the importance of listening to the voices of victims of sexual assault. As a district, we have policies against harassment and a commitment to listening to and protecting victims. We will continue to work to ensure that the Portland Public Schools are free of sexual violence and that we model for our students that it is safe to report because you will be listened to. Next Monday, Portland Public Schools will not be in session as we honor our nation's first inhabitants during Indigenous Peoples Day. On that day, we honor and thank the four main tribes, the Maliseet, the Micmac, the Penobscot, and the Passamaquoddy, known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland, as our community partners and original owners and traditional inhabitants of the land in which we now live. On October 18th, we will host a screening of the documentary Dawnland, which chronicles the quest for justice for Maine's native inhabitants. Also, as part of Parent University on October 11th at Lincoln Middle School, we will host a session on teens and vaping called Not Just Smoke. This is a very timely event as concerns grow across the country on the targeting of teens by the vaping industry and the potential for long-term damage to the developing minds and bodies of our youth. The input survey for the enrollment and facility study remains open through October 30th. We encourage everyone to take the time to share your thoughts as we begin this work. The board's appointment committee will meet tomorrow to begin the process of selecting appointees to the Commission on Enrollment and Facilities. The board will meet in a workshop and will have a first read on the slate of appointees a week from today, October 9th. And on that same night, we will host the first of 11 scheduled community forums on the study, that one at for the Munjoy Hill community at East End Community School. The information on all of these sessions is on our website and our Facebook page, and we look forward to hearing from our community on their thoughts about what we should be looking to evaluate. I also would like to remind board members and interested parties that we will be presenting the study plans to the City Council on October 15th at 4 p.m. right here in Chambers. As you heard from Chair Terraro, last Thursday we celebrated the grand opening of the new Rowe Elementary School. The event was really well attended and was a wonderful celebration of Nurse Amanda C. Rowe, for whom the school is named, and the legacy of learning that she instilled and lives today in the work of the school. I would like to recognize Principal Don Keniston and Assistant Principal Sarah Soroy and all of the Rowe family for organizing a wonderful event. Finally, I would like to announce that Portland Public Schools received a $150,000 grant from the Barr Foundation to support the district's work in creating pathways to college readiness for our students. The grant will allow the district to work with 4 other New England districts, Hartford, Connecticut, Malden and Worcester, Massachusetts, and Manchester, New Hampshire, to understand the experiences that define success in college persistence and plan how to expand those experiences to reach more of our students. We are grateful to the Barr Foundation for selecting our district for this work, and we are grateful to our Connect Ed partners for doing the original work that positioned us to be competitive recipients in this grant. And on a related note, so this is my reel finally, today we are joined by our Executive Director of Data and Technology, Mustafa Rastanpour. I announced Mustafa officially at last week's meeting, but he actually started yesterday, so this is his first board meeting, first of many. Those of you who have been on the board for a while may know Mr. Rastanpour. He is returning to us after a little over a year at Pine Tree Legal Services, where he was Director of IT. But prior to that, Mustafa worked for PPS for many years in various capacities, most recently as our head network engineer. I'm very excited to have Mustafa join our team and look forward to having him interact with you and lead our district's data and technology work going forward. So welcome, Mustafa, and we very much look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased and honored to be a member of Portland Public Schools one more time. And, I already actually had a pleasure working with some members of the board, and I'm looking forward to work with the rest. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome.
And that concludes my report.
Thank you. And we do not have a report of the secretary this evening. We do not have report of the committees. Finance and Personnel Committee is scheduled to meet October 9th at 6 o'clock p.m. Is that still the case, Ms. Bendel?
Yes, we actually recently moved our meeting, and it is the 23rd at 6 p.m.
Okay, thank you. And I have operations meeting at 6 o'clock on October 30th, and curriculum meeting at 6 o'clock on October 30th, and operations meeting in November 6th at 6 o'clock. So those are the upcoming meetings. Consent items.
Can I just make a comment about the report of the secretary? As you know, we had the board meeting last week, and so we did not have a chance to finish the minutes ahead of sending out the packet. That's why you don't have it, but we will have this meeting and last week's meeting at our next official meeting, which will be on the 16th. The meeting on the 9th, as you know, is just a special meeting for the Appointments Committee workshop and first read, so we will not have the minutes then, but we will have this and the previous one at that time.
Thank you. Consent items. Would the superintendent read the acknowledgement of donations?
Yes, under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district of durable goods, goods of significant value and of symbolic importance. As required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board memo accompanying this item. As has been the practice, each donor will receive a written contribution acknowledging their contribution, expressing our heartfelt gratitude, and for their tax purposes. So with that, I would like to thank the many contributors to the Portland Public Schools that have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and of historical or commemorative significance. The contributors are listed in the board agenda materials by name and by donation, and we are very, very grateful for their support of our work.
Thank you. We have no board focus on educational issues, and we have no old business. Moving into new business, consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to vote as the delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support the eventual move of programs for 3 to 5-year-olds into public schools, but only if it is well-planned and appropriately funded by the state. Is there a motion, Ms. Bendel? Seconded by Ms. Marioni? And would the superintendent like to, yes, Ms. Thompson.
Just for clerical, can we, on the agendas, change 3018 to 2018?
Yes, I
Thank you.
noticed that too.
The meeting is out in the future a little bit, just to give us enough time to get the minutes, done in advance of that.
Would the superintendent like to speak to the motion?
The Constitution of the Maine School Boards Association provides that each active regular member board of MSBA and each vocational region associate member board is entitled to elect a voting delegate to participate in the association's annual delegate assembly. The Delegate Assembly is responsible for proposed constitution and bylaw changes and considers resolutions of the association. So we are strongly encouraged by MSMA to elect a local delegate so that we have a voice in this process. This year's Delegate Assembly is scheduled for 3:25 p.m. Thursday, October 25th, the first day of the MSMA annual fall conference. As you know, last week you appointed Board Member Rodriguez to represent the board at the Assembly. Historically, the board has reviewed each of these resolutions and discussed and acted on the direction that they wish to take on it. Tonight, we're prepared to do that if you wish. However, I would like to propose 2 alternative approaches. First, just a little bit of background. The reason that MSMA puts forward these resolutions is to guide the work of its staff and to guide the legislative agenda, their advocacy work. It helps to shape the opinions of member districts as they go about their work, but they are not binding on members. We received these resolutions a week ago today, and so while we've reviewed them in advance of the packets going out, I'm not completely confident in our level of understanding of these issues at the level of detail that I would feel most comfortable with. So my first option for you would be to simply delegate to Mr. Rodriguez as your delegate the decision on how to vote for each of them. He will participate in the assembly, and he will have the advantage of hearing the staff and delegate discussions, and could therefore use that to vote his mind. My second option is for you to adopt the staff recommendations as the board's recommendations. As I've said, we've reviewed these resolutions and we've arrived at a position based on what we know. Alternately, you could do that, and then Mr. Rodriguez could attend the assembly with that guidance and vote accordingly. And alternately, we're prepared prepared to discuss each of them individually and go through the full board process for each of those. But I just wanted to offer up those alternatives in the spirit of, what I just discussed, the fact that we've received these recently and that there is more that will happen as a result of those discussions at MSMA. And so I offered those and would just sort of turn it over to you for discussion or questions and discussion.
Ms. Morioni?
First, I want to say thank you to Mr. Rodriguez for taking this assignment on for our board. And thank you, Superintendent, for your alternatives, that you presented. Having done this work 2, maybe 3 times, when you get there, there's no discussion. There is just simply votes. All the delegates get in one room, and then they read it. If anyone has any further questions, they can ask questions around it, but oftentimes there's not. It's pretty dry assembly, and so the direction I would request is that we actually, as the board, decide on how we want Mr. Rodriguez to vote on each of these at the time, and then leave it at that, so he can go in prepared to vote.
Ms. Thompson?
I concur with Ms. Morioni because he's going as a delegate and as representative for the Portland Board of Public Education. I don't agree with having one person make the decision based upon what they think is best. Again, he's representing the full board, and if you have concerns about some of these, I guess, or if there's something that you don't feel as though we should support, then I want to hear the reasoning behind some of that, if you would share that with us. But I've read through them thoroughly, as I have in the past with the other ones, and again, I don't see it at the level that you do, but I don't find any issues with any of them, and I'd like to, again, if we're going to send a delegate to represent us, then I think it has to represent what our full board decision is. Thank you.
So the motion before us is the motion as to how to authorize Mr. Rodriguez to vote on the first proposal. Well, there's consideration and action. Yes, we have a motion on the table. It's new business item A. Does the board feel like we need further discussion around this, or should we just go ahead and vote on them one by one? My question, because we could table this and have a discussion about how to proceed, or we should just proceed. Okay, so then let's just go with the motion on the table. Does that make sense to everybody?
Okay, so the first item that the board will be voting on is the move of programs for 3 to 5-year-olds into public schools. The MSMA resolution, as you know, supports doing that, but only if it is well-planned and appropriately funded by the state. The rationale offered by MSMA is that a proposal to move CDS services for 3 and 5-year-olds into public schools failed in the 128th legislature, largely because it lacked detail. The association, MSMA, supported the concept then, as it does today, because a school-based model minimizes disruption for children and is a logical extension of our existing pre-kindergarten programs. It also gives public schools the opportunity to intervene early when learning and behavioral problems are identified. CDS programs are offered through the public school system in most other states, and MSMA states that their support is contingent on the state funding required to provide these services in schools or in an appropriate outside placement, because we cannot continue to have the kind of shortfalls that have plagued CDS in the past or ask local taxpayers to pick up any of these costs. Our recommendation as we discussed that was to support it. We We, as we've reported in the past, are supportive of moving CDS to our schools. In fact, we engaged in conversations with CDS prior to the proposal even being formulated to actually provide some of those services in our schools, and, sort of that conversation got moved to the side because of the sort of broader move to try to do that statewide. So we support it, obviously, with the same, with a strong concern about the caveat that MSMA is concerned about, that this should not be done as a way to sort of transfer the responsibility, the underfunded or unfunded responsibility to local districts. And, that's a big caution that I think we would want to bring to that conversation. I feel that that's very much a part of what the MSMA resolution indicated, and therefore, our recommendation was to support that.
And just to clarify, as we're voting on these, if we vote in the affirmative, we're voting for Mr. Rodriguez to vote in the affirmative on these. Ms. Thompson, did you have a question?
Did we do a motion? Moved and seconded?
Yeah.
I missed that too.
It was moved by
I
Ms.
didn't-
Mendel and
Okay.
seconded by Ms. Morioni.
Okay, I just asked her.
It was a long time ago, and I threw a monkey wrench into it with
Ms. Morioni.
I thought that the motion was actually to affirm all of these, but are we going to take them one by one?
So I think that the second alternative that the superintendent talked about was just to accept the staff's recommendation, which is it to approve all of them?
No, we are suggesting that we not support the changes to special education and the longer school year and higher starting teacher pay.
Okay, so maybe we should just go through
Do them one by
each
one,
one then.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this motion? Seeing none, any further board discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support the eventual move of programs for 3 to 5-year-olds into public schools, but only if it is well-planned and appropriately funded by the state, please indicate. It's unanimous, with the students voting in the affirmative. Okay. This one's even longer. Consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to advocate the following comprehensive approach: ongoing risk assessments, not only for active shooter attacks, but other disruptions that could put students or staff at risk, increased focus on social-emotional support, training on early warning signs around student perpetrators of violence, and programs like Say Something, which encourage students to go to an adult with their concerns about a potentially violent peer. Increased funding in the revolving school renovation fund that includes school safety projects as priorities, and support for state and federal funding for school resource officers where appropriate. This also includes support tasking the department's facilities office to advise, collect, and disseminate best practices on keeping children safe. Is there a motion? Ms. Thompson, seconded by Ms. Morioni. And would the superintendent like to speak to this motion?
Yes, the rationale that MSMA, and we support this, the rationale is that the frequency and ferocity of school shootings in this calendar year alone have put school safety top of mind for school boards and the public. Standard practices have changed based on experiences during these tragedies, and we're gaining awareness of early warning signs in the cases where students are the perpetrators. School boards need to support an informed and comprehensive approach to make schools as safe as possible, including including mental health intervention. We, as I said, support that. We think that the call on the legislature to increase funding in the revolving school renovation fund to support safety projects as priorities is important. As the Operations Committee knows, we've been having discussions about some of the school safety sort of facilities improvements that we would like to make, and the revolving school renovation fund, as you know, has not had any money for the last couple of years, so if they would be able to include money for that, that obviously would be a good thing. It also calls on the state and federal funding sources to support the implementation of SROs in schools. As you know, we currently fund SROs in our two large comprehensive high schools out of the district budget, and it would be excellent to have another funding source, and we've struggled with being able to have an SRO at Paths, Casco Bay, and it's always come down to a budget situation. So for those reasons, we are supportive of this resolution.
Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to advocate the following comprehensive approach: ongoing risk assessments not only for active shooter attacks but other disruptors that could put students or staff at risk, increased focus on social and emotional support, training on early warning signs around student perpetrators of violence, and programs like Say Something, which encourage students to go to an adult with their concerns about a potentially violent peer, increased funding in the revolving school renovation fund that includes school safety projects and priorities, and support for state, federal funding for school resource officers where appropriate. This also includes support tasking the department's facilities office to advise, collect, and disseminate best practices on keeping children safe. Please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 board members, 2 students, all opposed. Mr. Rodriguez. Consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support the current state ban on guns, loaded or unloaded, on school property, and oppose any legislative attempts to amend that prohibition. Is there a motion? Mr. Atkinson, seconded by Ms. Thompson. And would the superintendent like to speak to this motion?
So I don't think obviously we support this. The board is on record with a resolution on this matter, so I think that the rationale offered by the MSBA echoes the board's stated position on this. We believe that the current Maine statute that prohibits guns on school grounds is, as MSMA describes it, as a bright line, and the first line of defense against school shootings. And not only does the ban prevent violence, but it reinforces that school grounds are supposed to be safe havens, and that we must not give up on that vision. So for that reason, I think staff obviously supports this.
Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support the current state ban on guns, loaded or unloaded, on school property, and oppose any legislative attempts to amend that prohibition, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative. Consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support the ongoing work toward the implementation of proficiency-based diploma systems in Maine schools. Is there a motion? Mr. Balafon, seconded by Ms. Thompson. And would the superintendent like to speak to this?
Yes, Madam Chair. So the MSMA rationale is that the proficiency-based diploma system currently in law is grounded in the state's standards of learning results adopted in the early 1990s. School districts are at different places in implementing the system, and a law passed at the end of the legislative session makes the system optional. We believe, this is MSMA, that was a step backward for students who should be given the time and support needed to master one level of coursework before moving on to another. It is incumbent, says MSMA, on school leaders to adopt a workable and more easily understood definition of a proficiency-based diploma and address areas of concern, including the grading system and the format of a transcript. The MSMA goes on to say that as a state, we cannot give up on the goal of making sure all of our students are prepared for success in work, post-secondary education, and life. As I said, we recommend that the board support this as truly we are a case study of some of the challenges that go with the work of transitioning to a proficiency system. And you heard me in my report today talk about the challenges of moving into a new grading system. But I think it's important to underscore, as the MSMA resolution does, that the grading system is a component of the larger system of a proficiency-based educational system, and that proficiency-based educational system is ultimately about having alignment in what we expect students to learn, to our learning standards, to the state standards and the learning results. And so making sure that we have that be at the center of how we organize learning. We've, conceded that the communications around this issue is complicated, and we have not figured out how to do that, as well as we need to, and we will continue to work in that direction. But the idea of having a proficiency-based graduation as opposed to one that is tied into credits is one that, as the board has previously supported, continues to be the direction that we support as an administration.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, is there any public comment? Seeing none, is there any board discussion? Ms. Morioni?
I just want to ask a clarifying question on the language that they used, and we may not know what they meant. So it says on whether to support the ongoing work towards implementation of the proficiency-based diploma. When they say support the ongoing work, do you think they're referring to the state's ongoing work of it, or they mean district ongoing work of it?
I would say that they mean both. I think that it fundamentally says that the law that the legislature passed, sort of giving us the two options, is flawed, and that they would, in essence, I guess, sort of you go back to the original comments about what these resolutions do is to give MSMA staff direction in terms of their advocacy work in the legislature and so on. This would place them in a position of advocating, as they did last year, for retaining the proficiency-based diploma.
Yeah, and I guess that's my only point for clarification. I would want this to be the state to go back to working on it so that we have standards for all of the subjects. I think that's also it leaves the districts, again, coming up kind of with their own in a lot of ways with the science and history and all of it. So I guess that would be my only question, if there were any questions Mr. Rodriguez would be asking at the time of the vote, is that to the MSMA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, I think that is a good consideration, and I do think that they mean both the state level and obviously saying that there is significant work that needs to happen at the district level to do this well, as we, all know, very, very well, so.
And if it is to ask the state to do it, maybe even adding in the word the state's work, state and district's work. It's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Ms. Clater?
Based on what Ms. Morioni said earlier about her experience, it doesn't really sound like there would be an opportunity for comments, but if there were, I think it would be important to emphasize that our district, while we have started implementing this, has experienced a lot of concerns from students based on not feeling in touch with the process. And I think that was really represented at Deering, but that it's something that's been felt throughout all of the schools, that students don't feel like they've been informed. And so for other districts in the state, that there really needs to be more of an emphasis on communication with students and with families about how and why, and more importantly, I think why, we are implementing standards-based grading.
Ms. Yuri?
Yeah, I'll echo Ms. Clater's remarks. I'm part of a statewide board that talks to different students about different education issues, and I was like, oh, one of the things I'm really passionate about is proficiency-based grading. And then another girl was like, oh yes, me too. And I was like, for or against? And she's like, against. And I was like, oh my goodness. So definitely lots of different very strong student attitudes throughout the districts and throughout Maine, particularly in northern Maine. And I think that is definitely a strong sentiment that a lot of people don't really understand what proficiency-based means, and especially proficiency-based diploma. So I would just ask you, Mr. Rodriguez, to try to communicate that to the people you're speaking with, because I think that it is essential and a very shared issue, not only in our state. So, thank you.
Ms. Morioni?
I believe it was last year, maybe the year before, but there were breakout sessions, on both days, which happen every year. And I was a part of a discussion group around proficiency-based statewide. And also, when you're in that assembly as a delegate to vote, you don't have a lot of time for discussion of the issue per se. But in the breakout sessions, I haven't seen the list of breakout sessions. I'm hopeful they'll have another one on proficiency-based. Sure. And I would encourage Mr. Rodriguez, and if I'm able to even go for a day, I'd be happy to try and get there. But yeah, exactly what you were saying. There's a variety of opinions, including our own district here in Portland. So, so I think that the clearer it can become for districts, particularly if the state is even considering to continue it, there's a lot of discussion around how to get it done. Yeah, so and as a state level direction. So I only mean thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Rodriguez?
Thank you, Chair. So just to recap, if I have the opportunity to advocate for the student voice to be included in the resolution, that's what I'm hearing really strongly from the student reps. So if I do have the opportunity, and if it is in a breakout session or otherwise, I'll definitely make an effort to do that. Give you my word.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support the ongoing work toward the implementation of proficiency-based diploma systems in Maine schools, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative. Consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to review and amend the special education system created by Congress on the federal and state level to assure all student needs are being met, as well as direct the MSBA officers to urge Maine's congressional delegation to support reforms recommended by the National School Board Association when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is brought up for reauthorization and fully fund the promised federal share of costs. Is there a motion? Ms. Morioni, seconded by Mr. Balfont. And would the superintendent like to speak to this motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. The rationale offered by MSMA is that the Special Education Task Force that met last year had recommendations that were designed to control the escalating costs and find better ways to serve special needs students, to remove barriers between special education and general education and create a more integrated and inclusive system, and use the response to intervention system early and more broadly to address issues when students first enter school, mitigate shortage of special education teachers by promoting dual certification programs at the university level, and address the costs associated with special education litigation, and identify ways to mitigate those costs, and to push for an education-friendly system to help schools and districts to bill for Medicaid and for Maine Care reimbursement. This is one where we've said that we would not support it, and the reason that we're suggesting we not support it is because that task force that convened in the fall actually had 9 recommendations, and so not included in the MSMA resolution are recommendations to reduce paperwork for teachers, to advocate for changes to federal funding formulas, and to review and rewrite special education laws at the state level to make them clearer, and to fund universal pre-kindergarten. And so we think that all 4 of those recommendations that were left out were among the most impactful and powerful of the recommendations that the task force made, and for that reason we actually think that we should pressure MSMA to adopt all 9 of those recommendations.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, Mr. Atkinson.
Sorry, I just want to clarify the staff position. So your recommendation then is to vote no, to say we will not support this because it does not include all of the 9 points of the group that studied this?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Morioni.
I think it could be helpful to have something written up to what you're saying if we do decide to vote no. Portland votes no, and because yeah, I think that could be an opportunity for Roberto to speak up about why we're voting no. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, any further board discussion? So Mr. Atkinson.
I'm sorry, it's essentially, it's another question. It's the same question again. Can I just be very clear about, we do support the 5 pieces of the recommendations that did get in there, and the only reason that we're not supporting this is because it's not comprehensive of all of those. Okay. Thank you. Sorry to ask the same question again, but I just want to understand completely.
Yeah. And I'm not clear exactly on the vote, and so you're really good at sorting through this, so.
So a vote in favor would be to authorize Mr. Rodriguez to vote affirmatively. So if we're opposed to this, then we vote in opposition. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. I assume the board could also consider me not voting, like abstaining on a vote as well, if there's a split on how we feel, or even if there's confusion on the resolution itself. So just keep that in mind.
I think if we wanted Mr. Rodriguez to abstain from voting on this one, we would need a motion to amend. Ms. Morioni.
I would like to make a motion to amend to add in language about what the superintendent was just saying in terms of the 4 other ones that were left out, adding those into the You can't do it like that, sorry, Ms. Thompson said.
No,
No,
can't do that. It's their motion.
actually, that's true, it's their motion. So we either accept it or abstain or
Well,
decline.
we either vote on it as it is and vote it up or down, or we amend it to say that Roberto abstains. Right.
I- Can I
Yeah, go
offer, and I'm sort of thinking out loud about this, so I think you could also vote it down and then introduce a different motion that would enable him to either abstain if that was the motion that you wanted to move forward, or to introduce another motion to have him introduce the other 4 recommendations as part of his action at the delegate assembly, so. But I'm not sure that that's true. I'm just thinking out loud, so.
Ms. Thompson?
I think you're correct from my experience of being there a couple.
It always happens at just the right time.
From my time being there, I think you can do that. You can stand and they ask you if there's any changes, but I think to make it cleaner and not put him in that position, I would like to make a motion for us to abstain on this particular item in voting.
Okay. Is there a second to that amendment? Ms. Bendel?
So, just to be clear, is that an amendment to the current motion, or do you want to?
It's amendment to him not to vote on this motion at all.
So it would be consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to abstain
That's correct.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
from the vote. Any questions on the amendment?
Well, what do we gain by abstaining? Why aren't we just advocating for what we want? If we want all the points, then we should amend this and ask for all the points, if that's available. So, we should be assertive about it.
Mr. Atkinson?
I just want to clarify Mr. Belfonte's position. Would you advocate then that we vote no on this to send a strong message that we would like all of the points to be included?
I think we can, I don't know the exact process, but if that's how we get there, we vote this down, and if there's an opportunity to explain or an opportunity to amend and advocate for all the points, then we should do it that way, whatever mechanism it takes. So if it's voting this down and amending, asking for all the points, then that's what we should do. If that helped.
And I think that that's where I would recommend that you vote on the original, the way that the original motion was written, so to allow Mr. Rodriguez to vote to support and, say no to that, and then introduce a separate one that would authorize Mr. Rodriguez to represent the board in asking for the other 4 recommendations of the task force being introduced at the delegate assembly.
Ms. Morioni?
From what I recall, they can't do it that way, and that's because each board member, each delegate member comes already from their board with the direction of how they're going to vote, and so there's no opportunity to make an amendment to that language, only because they're there as delegates of their board, and their board's already, just like we are doing, made an action for them to vote it up, down, or abstain. So there was never an opportunity to introduce any type of amendment.
Okay. Mr. Rodriguez?
Thank you, Chair. I think just to, I'm playing a scenario in my head that should one of the other resolutions, an amendment be introduced by another delegate, I would not know what direction to vote. So I can understand the position that Marnie just explained, and I probably would not feel comfortable voting, especially after hearing previously that the board members don't want me to vote my mind.
Ms. Uri?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question to clarify for myself. So if the board voted no or abstained from this special education reform suggestion, then how would that be making progress towards special education reform? Are we doing more harm than good by not supporting this reform that might not come up again in this near future, that doesn't have everything that we want, but has a substantial number of things that we want, rather than waiting out to see when in maybe the far future we'll have the opportunity to vote in favor of everything we want? My question is just, are we making more progress by abstaining and not voting than just voting for things that we do agree with?
Does the staff want to comment on that?
So, I mean, I think that that's why our recommendation is to vote against it, and because a vote against it is a vote to make it clear that there are other pieces of this that would make it, that would make it something that would actually achieve those reforms. So while I understand the idea of, it's a little bit towards that, I also think that a no vote is a vote to sort of make MSMA aware that they need to be more proactive and aggressive in their advocacy on this issue. And really, there's no, I don't know, I mean, I was not a privy to MSMA's direction, and the only reason I know that those other recommendations were not adopted was, in talking to staff as we were trying to prepare for this and understanding, what generated this. I wasn't aware of the 9 recommendations. I didn't know, the scope of all of the work that had been done around this. But I think that that's the reason that we're suggesting that. And I do. I mean, I obviously understand your position, and we debated this and, wound up where we wound up, but I totally understand where, it's incremental and you are getting some of that, so.
Superintendent Botana, my follow-up question then would be, so the process, if we voted no, and we're like, no, we want like a more comprehensive reform, so would the MSMA, if the greater delegation voted that way too, would they take that back, reform what they had, their position, and then next year we would get something else? Or how would that work if we voted no?
So I think that, I don't know. That's the short answer to that. In all likelihood, this will pass regardless of what position we take. So I think that, this, I don't want to say these are rubber stamped, but, in general, they sort of move forward. This is the consensus of, the MSMA board and their resolutions work. So in all likelihood, it goes forward. So I don't know that it does sort of send that stark a message. I also don't understand to what extent they have the, not having been there, I don't know to what extent there is an opportunity. In my experience in delegate assemblies, there usually is an opportunity to offer amendments in the same way that you offer amendments as a board, but, those can be messy, and it requires voice votes, and, somebody has to stand up and has to articulate all of that. And so I get the complexity of that, but there usually is an opportunity to introduce variations on a resolution in those processes, but it's not always the most transparent and, easy thing to do, but that usually does exist.
Ms. Thompson.
I was just looking at the agenda for the day, and it says that there is a delegate assembly preview for an hour, and then after that is the assembly where they vote. So the contents of that preview may be at a time where there's discussion and potential amendments made. I remember picking up our cards, because you have to hold it up to vote, but it sounds like here the preview may be the opportunity to have the discussion around those prior to the actual vote taking place on the floor.
Clarity around the process.
Ms. Crocker?
In my brief experience, having attended with the past several board members, there has been opportunity to learn more, to ask questions, to make points, to debate to some extent prior to the actual vote. So I think that we should go into this process with Roberto being clear on the intent of our board, so that he can do the right time on the spot, do the right thing on the spot, given the opportunity.
Mr. Atkinson.
I apologize if this has already been stated, but what are the four items that were not included?
The four items that were not approved, were not included, recommendations to reduce paperwork for teachers. Our special ed teachers are drowning in paperwork. Advocate for changes to federal funding formulas. Again, this has been a long-standing issue. I'm not 100% sure what the recommended changes would be, but it's basically sort of asking our federal representatives to advocate for changes to those formulas that would be more favorable to our situation. Rewrite state special ed laws to make them clearer. Again, thick set of rules that, are duplicative and, and so on, and then to fund universal pre-kindergarten.
Mr. Atkinson?
Yes, thank you very much for walking through those again. Those all seem very aligned with priorities of the board, and so I think I feel good about the staff's recommendation to vote against this, given the opportunity to clearly explain that we're not against the proposals, the proposals that are included, but that we would like to see the all 9 proposals. So I guess since we're debating the amendment right now, I think I will vote against the amendment.
Any other discussion on the amendment? I would just say I also am going to vote against the amendment. I think that we can work with the main motion a little more, primarily because, as I understand Robert's rules, you're not really supposed to abstain unless you have a conflict of interest. And we're sending a delegate to do that delegate's job, the sole responsibility being vote. So I'm going to vote against it, and we'll go to the main motion. Okay? So all those in favor of the amendment, which would be to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to abstain from the vote, etc., please indicate. Seeing none, all those opposed? It's one. You said no. Okay. It's unanimous with the students voting in the negative. Okay, so we're back to the main motion. Any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to review and amend the special education system created by Congress on the federal and state level to assure all student needs are being met, as well as direct the MSBA officers to urge Maine's congressional delegation to support reforms recommended by the National School Boards Association when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is brought up for reauthorization and fully fund the promised federal share of costs. Please indicate. Ms. Morioni and Ms. Thompson are voting in favor. All those opposed? Mr. Balfont, Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Atkinson, Ms. Bendel, myself, and the students. So that motion fails.
Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay. Consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 24th, 2018, to authorize, I just did that, on whether to support a law change to lengthen the school year to 180 instructional days and 10 days for professional development, as well as support a law change calling for additional state funding to raise the starting teacher salary to $40,000. Is there a motion? Ms. Morioni, seconded by Mr. Atkinson. And would the superintendent like to speak to this motion?
Yes, and here again, we are recommending not to support that, and well, let me first talk about the rationale that MSMA offers. The majority of states in the country have 180 instructional days, but Maine only requires 175. There's not enough time in the school year to do all that we have to do to help students succeed in terms of instruction and supports for their mental health and physical needs. Summer learning loss is real. If we're going to expect more of our students in the changing workplace most certainly demands it. We have to give them more learning time, and if we ever hope to address the achievement disparity for students coming from poverty, a longer year needs to be addressed. The 5 additional professional development days address the needs for teachers to have more collaborative time and meaningful training and support. So this is something that obviously we believe is a good idea. I think that, more instructional days is something that we are supportive of. My concern, I think staff's concern around this is about the fact that this is a very large funding commitment for the district. There's nothing in here that speaks to that being fully funded by the state. Our estimates of this is that it would cost us an additional $1.5 million to be able to add those days. And, given everything that we are, struggling with as a district, I think that, that to sort of recommend that in a vacuum without the funding support makes it something that it's hard for us to support. It also sort of throws in the funding to raise the starting teacher salary to $40,000. We're not that far from that point, so, and it's kind of an apples and oranges to have that mixed in with the, it makes it sound like that would deal with the problem, and it doesn't. That's an additional cost that we would have to incur, not to say that it's a bad idea, so.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, is there any public comment? Seeing none, any board discussion? Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just add that I personally also did not feel like this was something I was going to support. How do I say this? I believe that just adding days to the calendar by itself is not a fruitful strategy. I think that I look at it similar to the way that I treat my patients. The time that I spend preparing to see my patients, talking to other clinicians, kind of what we call professional development, and I know that that's mentioned in the resolution, that's really what brings value to the instructional days. So adding 5 extra days without really supporting professional development and making those extra educational days meaningful does very little to advance our overarching goals. I've said before that well, I'll leave it at that. I think I made a point. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, to vote
on whether to support
a law change to strengthen the school year to 180 instructional days and 10 days for professional development, as well as support a law change calling for additional state funding to raise the starting teacher salary to $40,000. Please indicate. And all those opposed? It is unanimously opposed, with the students voting in the negative. Ms. Morioni?
I know this is out of turn, but just as for the previous one, for this one, could Roberto have talking points or language around what the superintendent was just saying, if there is any type of discussion around why we wouldn't be supporting that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Consideration and action to authorize Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support a recommended age of 5 and compulsory attendance at age 6, as well as advocate for a law change in the first session of the next legislature. Is there a motion? Ms. Thompson, seconded by Ms. Morioni. And would the superintendent speak to this motion?
Yeah, MSMA's rationale is that currently 11 states have compulsory attendance at age 5, 25 at age 6, 13 at age 7, and 2 at age 8. In reality, many Maine parents already are sending their children to kindergarten at age 5, and MSMA's concern is the children that are not coming to school. So Maine's growing pre-kindergarten programs for 4-year-olds, and the majority of 5-year-olds enrolled in kindergarten are part of a robust early childhood program of which Maine should be proud. We support this as the rationale states. Most children do come to school at age 5, and I think that, making that a recommended starting age and lowering, what this actually does is it lowers the compulsory education age to 6 from the current 7, and so we are supportive of that.
Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, any public comment? Seeing none, any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Roberto Rodriguez to vote as a delegate at the Maine School Board Association's Delegate Assembly on October 25th, 2018, on whether to support a recommended age of 5 and compulsory attendance at age 6, as well as advocate for a law change in the first session of the next legislature, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative. And that is it for new business. We have no personnel this evening, and where it is before the hour of 10 o'clock, we would invite public comment on any items not on this evening's agenda. Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and call for a motion for adjournment. Ms. Thompson, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. All those in favor? It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative.